Welcome everybody to today's episode of Activist Lawyer. I'm here in the studio with Jack.
Hello everyone.
Hi Jack.
Hi.
And we are delighted to be joined by Eoghan O'Sullivan. Hi
Hello.
Eoghan.
How are you? How's things?
We are great and we are super delighted because you're here in
I
person.
know that's 5 episodes ago or something.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant to actually do something in person again. It feels great.
It's fantastic. It makes such a difference to us because the phone and Zoom and all is great, but it's just so nice to be in our lovely studio here. And it's been a while, hasn't it, Jack?
Yeah, it has been a while, and you don't need to worry about Wi-Fi connections or phone connections.
Thank goodness for that.
No
but anyway,
breaking up.
We will get to Eoghan in a second, but just for our listeners, a little bit of an introduction. Eoghan O'Sullivan is a solicitor with KOD Lyons. Eoghan qualified as a solicitor in December 2017 and is part of the Criminal Defence and Prison Law team, as well as the Children's Court and Childcare team. As a trainee, he worked on a number of groundbreaking prison law high court cases, including the recent successful challenge to single separation in Oberstown Detention Centre. Eoghan has experience in working on criminal trials in the Circuit, Central and Special Criminal Courts in Dublin, as well as around the country circuits. Eoghan completed a Masters in Law from Trinity College Dublin in 2013, studying modules based on employment law, arbitration, dispute resolution and criminal law. His dissertation focused on criminal assaults during sports matches and was entitled An Analysis of Sports, Violence and the Law, with specific reference to the GAA and whether there is a need to introduce or modify current laws or bylaws on the matter. Eoghan has a keen interest in criminal law, juvenile justice, childcare law, human rights law and dispute resolution. Wow. Welcome, Eoghan.
I'm very boring.
Clearly are.
Yeah.
Just nothing of
wish
interest
I had a
there.
bio like that.
I know
Yeah,
Jack is just sitting here going, oh my God, the dream.
Yeah.
Well, look, thank you so much again for coming to our little studio here. And I will say that we had one of your colleagues join us not so long ago.
Absolutely.
That was Stephen Kerwin, who came on from KOD Lyons, the same firm, and spoke about his work mainly in asylum and immigration. But anyway, just to start us off, Eoghan, and to stop me talking and rambling on here, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into working in this area. You can start from wherever you want.
Yeah, so I suppose I kind of felt from a very early age that I was going to get involved in law when I was going through school. And then I ended up applying for economics, politics and law in DCU. I suppose my background, my mum would have been involved in law. She used to work in the GPO in Dublin and she was in HR. So she would have kind of been involved in the WRC. I would have kind of found that quite interesting. And I suppose my dad's background wasn't so much a legal background. He's farmers from Southwest Kerry in the Glen and Ballinskelligs, and came up to Dublin and became civil servants. So from an early age, I suppose there would have been a bit of legal talk in the house. So I went to DCU and done economics, politics and law back in 2009 until 2012. And then I went on from there to complete a Masters in Trinity College in 2013. And I suppose during my time in DCU and Trinity, I would have focused mainly on the criminal elements of the degrees. I would have just always found them a lot more interesting to read and study rather than the conveyancing or the kind of
the
banking
riveting stuff.
Yes, absolutely. So I completed that in 2013. I was lucky enough then at that stage to apply for an internship in the DPP's office through Trinity College, and I got that and completed that for about 4 months, working in their prosecution policy and research unit with the gang in there. So would have been a lot of legal research into kind of case law and kind of stuff like that. And then I done what I suppose most people did in and around 2012, 13 and 14. I went on a dole for about 5 or 6 months. And in that 5 or 6 months, I got my first few FE1s out of the way.
Good
which
work.
Was good use of time, yeah.
It was.
They are, without a shadow of a doubt, the worst exams.
So depressing.
They sit them in the Red Cow. If I ever get an invite to the Red Cow for anything, it's just been automatically thrown into the bin. I cannot go back to that place again.
Me too.
There's just fear and tears, I think, all over that place. But I got them out of the way while I was on the dole. And then most of my college years, I would have worked as a postman, which was great. The best job I ever had. But I did, after I finished the FE1s, I fired around a load of internship applications to everywhere, just to get my foot in the door and get some sort of experience. I say I sent about 40 or 50, and I think 2 got back in contact with me. And one of them happened to be KOD Lions.
Class.
So they gave me a 2-week internship. I think it was at the start of May or end of May. And after the 2 weeks, they realised I wasn't a complete idiot and offered me a traineeship.
Only took them 2 weeks.
Only took them 2 weeks, yeah. They still haven't copped them a complete idiot yet, and I'm there 8 years, like so. But they offered me a traineeship then that October. So I went back to work as a postman for the summer, and came and started with them as a trainee in October, and haven't left. So
There since, wow.
there since, yeah.
Now
So
you're here.
Well, that is a real varied kind of background, and it's just funny there. You've just taken me back to the Red Cow, which I'm going to move on from that experience. But you're also as well. You said you went to DCU there. I've seen on LinkedIn and different social media you've been back. Maybe as a training or kind of mentoring students.
yeah, so my old professor in DCU, Eoghan Daly, she would have lectured us in a lot of the criminal aspects of law and evidence. I remember doing moot court in front of her before, and I suppose when they begin their law degrees, very few of them actually progress to get into the criminal law area of it. A lot of them go to the big corporate firms, and they get involved in the kind of banking and taxing and other areas of law, whereas I think the criminal law heads, if we can call them that, are a lot more niche. So I would have been one of the few who would have completed the economics, politics and law degree from that time that went on to do criminal law. So myself and Eoghan have always kind of kept in touch in regards to certain research she would have been doing, such as she's done a lot of work on the right to silence and Garda station interviews, so we would have been involved in that. And she's always asked me to come back and have a chat with the students, just basically about how you go from becoming or joining DCU and doing a degree like this to qualifying as a solicitor and practicing on a daily basis doing criminal defence, because there is very few of us. So it's great to go back to the college. I do feel really old going back to the college now, though. It is exactly 10 years since I graduated, which only dawned on me at the last chat. So
You're a baby.
I don't know, it's been since you graduated, so.
Moving on.
No comment,
It's about
Sarah.
Owen today, Jack.
No
okay?
comment. Is
It's
the
not about
advice I
me.
give, yeah.
No, but actually that is quite weird, and I never noticed it before. But in my class, when I was doing my master's, I'd say over half of the people that I was speaking to wanted to do criminal. But then when you're in university, the firms that come and do the open days and that they speak about within class are always the big corporate firms in Belfast. And then the training contracts that they offer obviously are very, very good. So then most of those people who wanted to do criminal and who had their eyes set on criminal end up just going into the corporate world. So
Exactly,
Similar.
yeah.
Never
No,
even
and it's the
thought,
same down south. They get all the kind of bigger firms in. They all come in and they all give you the big spiel, the bells and whistles about the offices and the great
And they pay your
opportunities.
fees.
It's a massive thing that the
so
fees are paid, and you're on a good wage. But I did, before I went to KOD Lions, I did interview for one of the big firms. I won't say who it was, but I didn't get the job, and the feedback was, we think you'd be suited to crime. So I was like,
there
okay,
you
fair
go.
enough.
Right.
Grant, you know?
We think you'd be suited to crime,
Yes.
not criminal law.
I was going to
Oh,
say,
sorry,
what did
criminal
they mean,
law, yeah, maybe.
Well, that
I may have took a few too many free pens. So, I don't know.
Oh, fantastic. Well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting area to work, and I dabbled in it a little bit. But how do you think people stay in it for long, or do you think, because you were just mentioning sometimes you're on call? I think you said you're on call last night.
I
was
was,
it?
yeah.
So, I mean, that's very tough going, and I guess you're put on a rota, and I know you share that with other, colleagues within your office. But does that become draining or tiring, or is it something you just get used to, receiving a call at like 3 a.m? Or
It is a tough job, and the on-call aspect of it it's very important. I mean, you need to have solicitors on call 24/7, because it's not as if crime stops at 5:30 and goes home for the day and then starts again at 9 a.m. So you need to have the access to a solicitor to advise people in a station or for any sort of emergency purpose. So it just comes hand in hand. I think when you're working in crime, it can be quite draining sometimes, and some of the stuff you're dealing with can be quite heavy. So you need a good outlet, you need a good release. I play a good bit of five-a-side now at the moment, and would have played a lot of GA and hurling throughout the years. That was my release to go train and smash up a few fellas and then I'll be fine again. I'll be ready to go back to work after that. And he'd be right as rain. I know I had a particularly difficult week this week and went playing five-a-side on Wednesday, and Thursday morning I was back happy, brand new. But it is quite a difficult area to work in. It does take a kind of certain person with a certain strength about them to deal with certain aspects of it. Particularly some of the cases that you're dealing with, they can be quite heavy. I won't get into them, but like people can imagine the higher level ones, the murders and high sexual offences and other kind of aspects of it. You just have to, like anything else, you have to remember it's a job, and you have to get on with your job and do it to the best of your ability for your client, because they're the one who are relying on you to look after them.
Absolutely.
So
we had a couple of guests on here that talked about the difficulty in stopping at the door, obviously, when you leave work and not think about it. It's impossible not to.
A lot of people working in human rights and I suppose criminal justice as well, it's the same thing. And I know we had guests on in here who work in criminal, and I mean some of the stuff they're dealing with, it's hard not to become emotionally attached, especially a lot of the legacy stuff in Northern Ireland, and they'd be involved in inquiries and all the rest. But your background is very varied, just as your work is. And
so obviously following the death of Ashling Murphy and other ongoing legal matters that are in the public eye and on social media, I've seen a lot of warnings about people posting on social media about ongoing legal matters, and I've obviously had warnings from family members, be careful what you post on social media. But reading some of the articles about the work that you do, I've seen the term sub judice, and what is it? Because you've seen the warnings about social media, posting on social media, but why should people be aware about it?
Well, I suppose sub judice directly translates as under a judge. So the matter is now for judicial consideration. Look, the world we live in now at the moment, social media is huge. It's involved in every aspect of people's lives, and everything is so instant. I suppose, I know one of the best bits of advice I ever got was from Judge Bernadette Owens down in Ireland, in the Republic. She said to me before that everything is so instant now, solicitors need to take a step back, look at what they're doing before they press send on emails, whatever it is that they're doing. And I kind of try and carry that across. And it filters in here. Obviously, the circumstances around Ashling Murphy's tragic killing was awful and very highly emotive for a lot of people, not just in just this country but around the world. A person has been arrested and is now before the courts in relation to it, and the courts system and the judicial system, as well as their defence team and the family of this girl, the justice system has to be allowed to conduct its business properly and in an unbiased manner. People putting up various kind of posts on Twitter and social media, be it pictures identifying people, maybe offering descriptions of their background, their previous background, other information, and not only about the person who was arrested, but probably witnesses involved in the cases or anything in relation to it. It's gotten to a stage now where when matters are coming for trial in Dublin, that it's almost second nature for judges to give the usual warnings to a jury that they would when they're coming to their decisions, but they're including a warning now not to go and do their own independent research or whatever, or go onto social media because of what's been put up there. And the last thing that a person would want is to be hauled before a judge in the Central Criminal Court in Dublin, in the High Court, to explain whatever post it is that they had put up that may have had a very negative impact on how they can conduct their business in the trial. That can have, as I said, a negative impact on the constitutional rights of the person who's been arrested and is before the court. It can also have an impact on the access to justice for the family of this person who's been killed. So I don't think people appreciate that. And once they click send, it's out of your control, it's gone. Even if you're trying to delete it later, it doesn't mean someone can take a screenshot of it and send it around various WhatsApp groups. The courts definitely clamped down on it when it came to the identification of the boy A and boy B online from the Anastasia Kriegel case. That's right. And they ended up before the circuit court and were receiving suspended sentences and very serious convictions. And again, those convictions are something that follow people through life and can have various consequences for them if they want to travel or gain employment. They're not going to shake that off anytime soon. And a lot of them said they didn't realise that what they were doing would have had the impact that it did and had
Yeah.
them before the courts. So I suppose it was very highly emotive at the time. People need to take a step back and I suppose realise that the system has to be allowed the time
Yeah.
to do its work in an
Yeah.
unbiased manner, so that, you know, whatever conclusion it comes to, it's done as appropriately and fairly as possible for all involved.
sides,
Yeah.
for all parties.
And is
yeah.
it just what's seen as normal social media like Facebook, Instagram, or is it, as you said, about sending stuff around WhatsApp? Because you hear about a lot of that. Does it include WhatsApp as well?
It would be anything,
Anything.
anything at all. Like, I mean, we've all been on WhatsApp groups where the messages are being forwarded, and who knows what truth is in them, but it could have a negative impact.
Yeah, yeah.
So, like, people are going to talk about it, and like, it's no problem. And I know it's going to be written about in the newspapers, and you know, everything is like, it's kept appropriate.
Yeah.
But sometimes people can overstep the
Yeah.
mark in what they're putting online. And look, people get highly emotive about these things. They can be very passionate, but sometimes you just need to take a step back, consider it before you click send on anything like that, because once you do, it's out of your control.
It's out of your hands. Oh, good. Yeah, it's just we have to be so mindful. And just as well, I guess, moving on to something else that we haven't touched on in a while is COVID-19 and the whole pandemic. I know we were in contact here with a few local practitioners who would do criminal, and they were briefly, you know, telling us how it impacts their work, and barristers, with everything being kind of clogged up now, or being either they're expected to be somewhere with very little notice, and then you have the whole Zoom activity. How did the pandemic affect your work, Eoghan, in terms of, you know, kind of the practical side of things?
Well, I suppose like everywhere else, the country went into shutdown March 2020, and nobody knew what was happening for a little while. The courts went into shutdown. I think everyone was just trying to get to grips with what was going on. There was a lot of delays. There was a lot of block adjournments of cases. A lot of hearings didn't get on. A lot of trials were cancelled or moved. And I suppose, thankfully now we're at the stage where a lot of changes have been made, I suppose, that benefit the criminal justice system in any event, such as a much wider use of video links between the court service and the prison, but also between practitioners and seeing their clients, so you're nearly able to see them a lot quicker than you would have if you were booking visits to go in and see them physically. And there is, I suppose, an emphasis now at the moment that everyone is trying to get as much on as they can. They've started to use Crow Park as a court down in Dublin. Yeah, so there was a particular trial we had where the numbers were just way too big to fit them all into the CCJ building.
Right.
So they sent it down to Crow Park. Yeah.
I don't know.
So it's a great setup that they have, and it's just a way to kind of clear this backlog for a lot of big trials. But thankfully now we're at the stage where things are moving on. One of the problems I have with it is I do a lot of work with juveniles. So my kind of area would be a lot of criminal defence, but mainly with juveniles in the Children's Court in Smithfield in Dublin. And at the time there was a pause on kind of Gardaí charging people with offences. They were all told to summons them for a while, because I think they didn't really want the interaction. They wanted to, this was at the very start now, where they didn't want too much interactions. That was the case. But then there was a pause and the summonses being issued as well.
Right.
So now there's a huge backlog coming through of, I don't know how many tens of thousands of summonses of people that are now coming before the courts. And not to say that that's fine for adults, like it can be quite difficult for people when they're trying to deal with some criminal matter hanging over their heads that's been delayed for so long. But particularly when it comes to juveniles, the onus has to be that it has to be done as quickly as possible, particularly for some of them that might be creeping up to their 18th birthday. And that's my bugbear. We're seeing a lot more of the summonses coming in now for alleged offences from when they were children, and now they're 18, 19, 20, 21 even.
Right.
You know, or even further, and they're coming into courts having lost the benefit of the Children's Act in Dublin, which again is something I have a bit of a difficulty with, that you have this act that protects you and offers you as a person who's assumed to have committed a crime these benefits and safeguards and protections under the Children's Act, but the hour after your 18th birthday, that's all, it's gone, you know.
God, I never thought of that.
And it doesn't take into consideration special circumstances. It's
gone. So one of I think the most important aspects of the Children's Act is it's a Section 75 hearing, And basically a Section 75 hearing is where if a child is charged with an offence that could be indictable and sent to the circuit court, and the directions come back from the Director of Public Prosecutions to say that it is something that they want to go to the circuit court, you can ask the judge in the children's court to fix a Section 75 hearing, so you can argue with them to keep it in the district court. All right. So, like, if you're an adult, you're charged with an offence, it's trial on indictment. You're just looking at the charge sheet. You don't find any. You're not able to put forward anything. It's the directions are the directions. This is where it's going. When you're a child, if you're charged with an offence that can be dealt with on indictment, you are given an opportunity to put forward the age, maturity, and any other circumstances in relation to the child that might be relevant to the case, to ask the judge to keep it in the children's court, even though it is a serious offence.
Yeah.
Because I suppose when you're dealing with children, there's my own view from dealing with them for the last few years is there's no such thing as a bad kid.
Yeah.
There's just a kid that's had a bad time, you know, or there's some set circumstances that has led to them to being there. Yeah. And that, my own view, that has to be outlined to a judge so that they know kind of where this may be coming from, and give them an opportunity to deal with their matters in a, I suppose, more minor setting in the district court, rather than open them up to much harsher penalties in the circuit court. So, for example, there's a Section 15A drugs matter.
Okay.
If a person is found in possession with drugs over the value of €13,000, it's automatically indictable. You go to the circuit court, and there's a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years, which can be mitigated down depending on the circumstances. But you're an adult, that's where you go. In the children's court, if a young person is caught with drugs over the value of €13,000, they're charged with this offence. Of course, the directions are this is only indictable, so it's indictable. But you get to argue with the judge, or not argue with the judge, but put across your client's case to keep it in the children's court, so that perhaps they might be given a chance. So if you have some poor kid who may have racked up €100 of a drugs debt from the local in the area, who's told, go and pick up school bag at point A and bring it to point B, and the guards stop him. This kid has never been in trouble in his life, hasn't, you know, come to anyone's attention, and probably won't ever again after something like this happens. The benefit of Section 75 hearing is you can get it kept in the district court if that's the decision of the judge. They engage with probation. They might even be given a chance to be left without a conviction on the record. You know,
Huge difference.
A huge difference.
And what's the likelihood of it? I mean, is it common that it does happen?
That matters like that get kept?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be. I've had clients where it has been kept, and they actually have been left without conviction on the records, which is amazing going forward for likes of travel and, you know, employment for something as big as that. And it's the only way I could describe them, and I have described them as this in front of the judges, is they're one-hit wonders. They're not going to come to the attention again. This is their lesson that has been learned, you know. And that's why that's such an important aspect of the Children's Act. But the minute you turn 18, that's gone. You're no longer entitled to that Section 75 hearing, even if the offence is supposed to have been committed when you were 15, 16, 17. So that's something I have a really big problem with. And
so that's happening now,
That's
obviously.
happening now with the delays from COVID.
Gosh, that's so unfair.
It's one of those things you don't even think of. COVID, obviously COVID affects the economy, it affects health, but these things, it affects and goes unnoticed, really.
And I wonder, with justice, like the Department of Justice or anything, you know, open up, I don't know, some kind of debate around this, because it's such a big impact.
Hopefully. I know myself and a couple of my colleagues who are fantastic advocates in the Children's Court are looking at potential challenges to the fact that you can't have this hearing once you turn 18. It seems to discriminate against a certain particular people.
Cohort of people who happened to be around when this pandemic struck and impacted their
But even sometimes, not even when the pandemic was around, there was still
previously
huge delays in matters coming through the JLO system, and unfortunately they end up before the courts after they're 18, and there's nothing you can do, there's nothing you can say to try and argue to keep it. Just like someone who's an adult, you're not allowed to give any sort of background in relation to them to ask a judge to consider keeping it in a district court. So that is something that really bugs me. I think I think it should be a case that our legislatures should have a look at the Children's Act and see how we can adapt it. It's even just something as simple as saying you have the benefit of this act if you're alleged to have committed an offence before you're 18 for the entirety of the case proceedings. You know,
simple as that. But it would make such a huge impact on people's lives. You know,
and it's not just Section 75 hearings. There's other kind of aspects of it that are gone when you turn 18. Anonymity is gone. And I suppose mandatory engagement with probation is also gone. Now I know the judges do take on board that there were juveniles at the time and would probably order a probation report in any event, but that mandatory aspect of it is gone, like, you know. So and just from something as easy as changing the act to saying this will benefit you for the entirety of the proceedings if an offence was committed when you were a child.
You would think once the alleged act happens, it kind of stops at that age until it's resolved. You would think it's nearly common sense.
You should nearly be seen to treat the person at the time of the offence, rather than where they are now in the world. You know?
Yeah, obviously one of the topics that I was super interested in was the relationship between sports and law. So reading your dissertation title and how it spoke about criminal assaults in law, what's the ins and outs of that? Because obviously there's rough and tumble on the field, but when and how does that spill over into a criminal act and off the field then?
Yeah, so when I was in Trinity College, we had to do a dissertation, and I think the hardest part of doing a dissertation is trying to find out what you want to do it on. So I was obviously I'm mad about sports and I wanted to get into crime, so I thought there might be some sort of way of kind of marrying the two. And then I kind of remember a couple of incidents where people ended up before the courts as a result of fights on the pitch or whatever happened on the pitch between two people, and it was really interesting to look into it. And I suppose basically if an incident happens on the pitch that is both outside of the playing rules of the game and the playing culture of the game, then you're potentially liable, both criminally and civilly, if a person wants to take an action against you, to the outcome of what that is. So if I can perhaps give an example, in hurling, you're implicitly consenting to pulling, dragging, shoulder barging each other, kind of bumping into each other, like kind of bashing into each other a lot. And then there might be the odd pull of the hurley on the ground across the legs when the ball is there and that sort of stuff. Or if you're going up to catch a ball, they might pull across the hand, like going for the ball. You kind of implicitly consent to all of that, and that's all within the rules and kind of within the playing culture. And I suppose playing culture-wise, even if it's off the ball, your opponent might give you maybe a bit of a dig at the butt of the hurley into your ribs or something, like, it's not the biggest thing in the world, but it's kind of part of the playing culture. If somebody decides to, off the ball, completely bash you with the hurley and cause you serious harm, then that's outside of the playing rules and that's outside of the playing culture. And that's when you can expose yourself to potentially being before the criminal courts. If you take it from a football side of view, if there's an off the ball punch, someone's jaw's broken, then there's a lot of people who end up before the courts there. And it can, I suppose, have a devastating effect on both the person who's hurt, but also the person who gets involved in it. We've all been involved in sports teams and kind of been in the heat of the moment, in the heat of battle when you're playing against your local rivals and things are getting tough and someone said something about your parents or someone said something about whoever, and you get really stuck into it. But there is that line, you can't cross that line, and I think people are starting to learn it a little bit more now, because I think back in the day there was a few videos on YouTube that I looked up when I was doing dissertation, and one of them is a great video of Paddy O'Shea hitting Dinny Allen a crack across the jaw, and he floors him in front of the referee, and the referee doesn't even book them. He gets the two of them up to shake hands, move on, and they were grand, like, and it was a cracker of a punch that he hit him.
I know, thinking back, actually, Dad was showing me it was an FA Cup game or something, and the goalkeeper caught the ball, and 10 seconds later, after the goalkeeper caught the ball, the player ran in and absolutely smashed him. And supposedly that was part of the rules back then. Broke the goalkeeper's jaw. The goalkeeper went off on a stretcher, came back on 10 minutes later, and not even a free kick was given. Like, it's crazy looking back.
And like that's what it was back then. Like, but now I think we're in a different world. People are so reliant on their employment, their jobs. Like, if someone gets a broken jaw and is out of work for 3 months with wires in their jaw trying to get themselves back to normal, like, I mean, they had like I'd be very annoyed if I was in that position. Like, so unfortunately, once you kind of cross that both playing rules and playing culture of whatever sport it is, you're exposing yourself to potentially end up before the courts.
And it's so easy to get lost. Once you step over the line onto the field, it's kind of nearly like you're in your own world, and you forget that there is consequences outside the field. And when you're playing against your rivals and a fight starts, you forget, hold on, I need to take a step back here.
And I think everybody knows that person on your team who's the nicest fella you'll ever meet in your entire life, but once he crosses that white line, he's a demon. Like,
yeah.
You know?
And then the crowd as well, they don't mind.
No, not at all.
Either jumping on the field or making sure they're shouting to.
Well, you look at I think was it the recent game Tyrone and Armagh with murder at it.
I heard that being discussed several times in this office.
Great game. It was a fantastic game.
Jack, it's Armagh through and through.
Good man, fair play.
So
the girlfriend's Tyrone.
Yeah. So
how do you live
first
together?
time the parents met and at the game, and I came out of that game very, very happy that I didn't. But it was a great game. So most of our listeners are young, aspiring either lawyers or students who want to get into the law. So would you have any advice for them coming into the world of law from your point of view?
I give a good few talks in DCU to a lot of students, and I really enjoy talking to them because I think people like ourselves, when we're in these positions, passing on that information about how you got there is a massive benefit to them. Anytime I go in and talk to them, the first thing I always say to them is enjoy yourself in college. Like, enjoy your time there. Get stuck into the societies, the SOCs, the events. Enjoy your studies. And then once you're finished your degrees, have a really good think about what you want to do next. In a number of areas. If you have any itch to go travel. If you have any itch to work abroad somewhere else, go and do it. And then if you're coming back to study to become a solicitor, fine, that's great, you'll have it out your system. Because once you get on that kind of wheel that is the FE1s and all that, or even going to the King's Inn, it's very difficult to get off, and it's very intense, and you want to try and get it done as quick as possible to get qualified as quick as possible. And I suppose the FE1s are the worst exams I ever sat in my entire life.
You really hate them.
I really hated them. And I come back to the Red Cow again, I'm never going into that building.
Darn Red Cow.
Even when I'm on the Lewis going past it, next stop, Red Cow.
If you get a wedding invite to the, Red Cow, you'll not be going.
In the bin. But like the next thing I'd say to them is have a good think about what area of law you want to work into. Don't just apply, I suppose, all over the place to various offices and all. It's a completely different employment market at the moment to when I came out of college. When I came out of college, you had to take what you got because there was so few traineeships at the time being offered that if you were given one, you took it with two hands and you ran. Now people are crying out for trainees. There's so many roles for solicitors. There's so many roles for paralegals, legal executives, anything to do with law, that it's just it is a completely different market. So it's a good time to be coming into it. Have a think about what area of law you want to get into. You don't want to do something that you hate. I love crime. I love the fact that I rarely ever sit behind a desk for more than 2 or 3 hours a day when I'm doing my paperwork. I love being in court, on my feet, advocating for my clients, having the back and forth with the guards or the judge or whoever. There's a real, I think anybody who works in crime, because it is quite intense, there's a real camaraderie with a lot of people around my vintage, that we all kind of look after each other, and you know, it's a good place to be in. I could not see myself doing anything else, and I wouldn't change it for the world. But crime isn't suited to everybody. Some people want to do the immigration. I'd say the thrill of that phone call to a client who you've gotten citizenship for is amazing. You know, some people want to get involved in PI, Medneg. Have a really good think about where you want to go, and then try your best to get internships in these placements, because I think that's the best way that an employer is going to see what you're like and whether they can work with you. We run the DCU intra-placement program in KOD Lions, and we get students in for basically an Erasmus year, basically a placement year in the middle of their degrees. I think it's in their third year degree. We've done it for like the last 4 years, and they've been brilliant.
That's
and some of them have been offered traineeships, and we hopefully have more coming in September.
That's
and it
so
gives
important.
them a real grounding moving forward with their legal careers. I know, and I don't know what it's like in other offices, so I couldn't speak on it, but when you come into KOD Lions, you are given so much responsibility from the get-go that I'd say you'd nearly be able to work anywhere in the world after the kind of training that you would have gotten. My first day in KOD Lions was a Monday. I arrived at 9 o'clock. I was given 10 High Court bail folders, told to get my arse out to Clover Hill, talk to the barristers and the guards and try and get these lads out. It's their last chance. And I was like, what?
No pressure there.
No pressure. Like,
Oh my goodness. Well, that is fantastic advice, but I really think that's a great program that your firm operates to give that hands-on experience. It did not exist when I came out of college at all. But in terms of this podcast, and we always ask our guests the same question at the end around activism, and you are, an activist lawyer for your clients and, your client base, I guess, in general. What does that mean to you? Is it important to, use the law as a tool to make change or to...
Absolutely. When you're working in criminal defence in particular, you come across some of the most vulnerable people in society. There's lots of people with addictions. There are people who are suffering with homelessness, mental health issues. And unfortunately, these people sometimes aren't getting the help that they need from the state, which results in them becoming a statistic in a criminal justice system. Say particularly around juveniles. Gareth Noble in our office is doing a tremendous amount of work at the moment in relation to assessments and needs and how they're not being carried out in an adequate fashion. And then once they are carried out, the treatments that are available, appointments are being booked 2 or 3 years in advance for these kids to get the help that they need. Unfortunately, these people are becoming part of the criminal justice system, and we find sometimes that we have to use the criminal justice system to get them the help that they need then going forward. I think back to some of the cases that I've looked after where some children would have been in the care of the state and would have reached the threshold of secure care where they needed the highest level of care in the country. There's only 16 beds available for these children, and on any given day of the week there's 40 kids who need it, 40 kids. So you've children who are deemed to have reached that threshold, no bed available. What do we do with them? And then they get into trouble, they come into the criminal justice system, and then they have to deal with that. Whereas if they were given the help that they needed originally, maybe that mightn't have happened, and maybe they wouldn't be trying to deal with the initial problems that they're coping with, and then the criminal side of it as well. And similarly, I talk to my friends, and my friends go, how can you defend these people? How can you represent such and such before the court for these type of offences? And the way I look at it is, you're in a very lonely place when the machines of the state, the might of the state is bearing down on you, accusing you of something. You need to have a defender in your corner that will speak up for you and try and look after your interests as best as they can. And just because some people appear before the courts a lot doesn't mean that, they don't deserve any help. It could be anybody any day of the week. My dad is from Kerry. They have these Kerryisms, and he has a saying for everything, but the one thing that sticks with me all the time is he says, it's the silk thread that'll pull you into a situation that the chain of a ship's anchor won't get you out of.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So some people who would have never been in trouble in their lives, something could happen. They could end up in trouble. They need a bit of help, and that's where we would come in. And it doesn't even have to be something huge. Like, say, for example, someone's driver's licence. If you pick up penalty points because of whatever road traffic offences, your licence could be your livelihood. We'd have to come in and help. If you're a young student who's studying in college, you're caught with a small bit of drugs, you appear before the courts. If you get a drugs conviction, that could be the end of your employment and travel opportunities, and doors are closed to you. So, these people also need defence. It's not just the big people who've come in with hundreds of convictions. Those people, unfortunately, I would say, have been failed by various services, be it addiction services, homeless services, to have ended up at the stage where they're at. But it could be anybody any day of the week that needs a bit of help from a defence lawyer, and that's where we would come in.
Fantastic. Wow. Yeah, just such good advice, and you can really see into your work just from you speaking about how passionate you are about it. And I guess, you have to have a level of passion to do what you do, because it is intense. And, really, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will be really appreciative of you sharing that with them. So, well, look, thank you so much, Eoghan, for coming all the way up to the Big Smoke of Newry.
We
We really appreciate it. And It's been lovely to deal with some, it sounds like a lovely office that you work in, and, you've got great champions there. You've mentioned a couple there, so it'll be great to maybe get everybody together at some stage for an event or something with Activist Lawyer. But thank you so much for taking your time today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Not at all.
This podcast was recorded in Granite Podcast Studio. Interested in starting up your own podcast but don't know how? Granite Podcast Studio can help. Record your podcast in our state-of-the-art studio, which is based in the heart of Newry City. Our studio has cutting-edge and user-friendly technology and can seat up to 4 people. We also provide an editing service for our team, using your guidance and editing notes to provide you with a flawless finished product, leaving your listeners wanting more. For more information on how you can get started, visit www.granitepodcaststudio.com.